Welcome aboard CCO's The Science of Fishing, your one-stop destination in the ever-evolving world of fishing. Here, stay ahead with our latest reports and innovative tactics, all tailored to help you land the catch of the day, every day. Each episode dives into seasoned anglers' insights and the top-tier products they use to prepare you to make every fishing trip a success story. A big shout out to our generous sponsors, Gulfstream Lures, Tackle Crafters, and Black Reef Spearfishing for making this podcast possible. And now, let's cast off into our angling adventure. Introducing your trusty guide and host, Mark Farag.
What's going on, everybody? Mark here with The Science of Fishing. We're here today with Bill Falconer from Anglers Resource and Fuji. We're going to talk all things Fuji today, from where they came from, what their origin is, how they're arguably, if not the best rod components in the world, and what kind of fish have been caught on their components and in all their manufacturing and all their good stuff. How you doing today, Bill?
I'm well, Mark. Thanks so much for having me. Excited to be here.
Absolutely, absolutely. So you're down in Alabama, right?
Correct. So the company's based in Foley, Alabama. It's called Anglers Resource, but as you said, we are the North American distributor for Fuji Rod building components. So guides, tip tops, reel seats, grips, thread, kind of everything rod building. We also distribute AB1 carbon fiber and titanium rollers and carbon fiber butts and high performance titanium gimbals and reel seats, but that's sort of a niche stand-up big game offshore product. So the majority of the business is Fuji, and that's sort of where we came up for sure.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So I know you were recently put in your position, right, as the president and CEO.
Yeah, that's right. So I spent 28 years in the healthcare industry in kind of process optimization and financial management for hospitals and big health systems. But I've always been a hardcore angler, multi-species, any fish, any tackle, anywhere since I was probably 4 or 5 years old. And I've been a custom rod builder on the side for 28 years. And so I got to know Fuji by if you'll forgive the sort of long answer, as a custom rod builder, if you want to scale your business and become more profitable, but you still want to be the person who's handcrafting all the rods, ultimately what you have to do, the kind of the rate limiting factor is your time, right? And so it takes you just as much time to build an inexpensive rod as it does to build a bespoke premium, like really high end rod, right?
Right.
And so, of course, you can command a better price and a better margin on the higher end stuff. And so I got some really good advice probably 2 or 3 years into my custom rod building that somebody told me, a friend and mentor, Tom Kirkman, who's the editor of Rod Maker magazine, told me, he said, when was the last time somebody turned down one of your rods based on price? And I said, never. And he said, well, you're not charging enough. Right. So, I started focusing very exclusively on high end, custom built to order, kind of bespoke, technique specific. Like the more somebody knows exactly how they're going to be fishing, exactly which reel, exactly which bait or lure, the line, whatever knots, connections, whether they're casting, whether they're dropping and jigging, whether it's live bait, whether it's plastics, artificials, all these variables. I got really dialed in on trying to build these high-end, high-margin rods, and that's kind of what brought me to Fuji, was a quest to literally try every single product out there to figure out what was the best. And then I wanted to put the best on my rods. If I wanted them to be the best, I felt like they needed to use the best components. And so that's kind of how I got to a point of using almost exclusively Fuji for a long time, almost 2 decades. Kind of had a collegial affiliation with them as a brand ambassador for 5 or 6 years. And then, as you alluded to, just back in September, I got out of healthcare and purchased the company. And so now this is my full-time gig, and I'm living the dream. Everybody warned me. They said, if you the best way to never go fishing is get into the fishing business. And so far that hasn't proven true. So I've gotten to be in the fishing business and be all about the Fuji components I've come to believe in and respect and admire so much over the last couple of decades. And I also get to fish more than I used to when I was traveling around to hospitals all the time. So far, so good.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So before we start getting into all your different fishing trips that you've been on lately and what you've been doing, tell us a little bit about Fuji. I know it started way back in the 90s. I know you and I talked a little bit about the history of it. Can you give us, as being now the exclusive distributor in the U.S. or in North America, What is the
Sure.
history of Fuji and how has it developed over the years?
Yeah, well, it's a fascinating story, right? So the company has been around since 1938 and started originally making parts and pieces, stamped and sort of uh, machined metal pieces for typesetting and printing, and then for some other industrial applications, which included some ceramics, kind of dabbling in ceramics. And so they're kind of this emerging manufacturing concern, right, in the late 30s, early 40s. And at the same time, it's a family-owned business, and the Omura family has owned it for since 1938, and the third generation of Omura is currently the president of the company, Kazuhito Omura. And so his grandfather, Ryuichi, was a long story short, his father and grandfather were both like world champion distance casters, surf casters, right? And so as they're developing this manufacturing capabilities sort of during and after World War II, they started kind of trying to figure out how they could apply what they were learning to fishing, since they were passionate about fishing and really specifically passionate about understanding the physics and science of casting and fishing, and what makes a rod cast a long way, what makes a rod sensitive, what makes a rod durable, um, what enhances performance and the angler's enjoyment and all these kinds of things. And so that was kind of what they eventually got to, where they were so full time into that they sort of quit everything else and became a fishing tackle manufacturing or fishing rod component company. And there was really kind of two sides to it for the company. One was reel seats, which we see Fuji reel seats on uh, just about every tackle store you go into. You look at high end rods, it's got a Fuji reel seat, and all the other reel seats that are out there are, for the most part, with the exception of heavy duty offshore, metal seats and things like that, they're copies or kind of offspring of the Fuji design of seats, right? So again, related to the distance casting that the Omura family was so serious about and so globally competitive. I mean, it's many times international distance casting champion, the current Mr. Omura, his father Ryuichi. Um, so they started looking for ways to just optimize distance casting and surf casting rods. And they developed kind of what we think of as the plate seat. If you're familiar with kind of the plate seat, they put on these really large diameter surf rods still to this day. And then they started messing around with kind of what we think of as pipe seats, or like a round seat that, you has hoods and you can tighten it either up locking or down locking to sort of secure the reel. And then they couldn't get around weight. They were dealing with the flex of the blank all the way through the handle on these big fiberglass rods they're distance casting with back then. And they decided they needed to come up with something that was more flexible than metal, and that's when they sort of came up with the kind of a graphite infused or fiber infused thermoplastic. And that's kind of the standard reel seat that we think of today, whether it's a spinning reel seat or a casting reel seat. That was a kind of Fuji's biggest innovation, that they turned the world on its ear with reel seats in 1979, doing that. At the same time, they were developing guides, right? Because on this distance casting thing, the performance of the guide, how much friction there was on the line, was a big deal. How well it protected your line was a big deal, because if you broke your line during competition, you were out, right? There's all these kind of rules. It's almost like PGA golf or something. There's a bunch of elaborate rules for how you do this. So at the same
Right.
time they were working on these seats, Fuji started in the late 50s, early 60s, making metal ring guides and trying to have them be very uh, high polished and slick. And then they said, well, we think it'd be better if we put some kind of a ring inside the guide. So they experimented and produced guides with agate rings and glass rings. Then they used a different kind of metal, tungsten carbide and hard chrome. And then they sort of had the breakthrough. And about in the, I don't know, early 70s, they came up with the notion that they would put a ceramic ring on a rod. And at the time, ceramics were very brittle. We didn't have the same level of ceramics and kind of the understanding of ceramics that we have now. And so they had to have a shock ring on them. And so they first made a ring called the Cera ring, and then the hard ring. And that was just again, absolutely a game changer. And there was a company in the U.S. called Lou Childry and Sons, and they're, if you're a freshwater bass fisherman, you know that name, Lou Childry speed sticks, the speed spool reels and all this. And actually the company's been kind of reformed and that brand has been brought back in the last decade or so. But Lou Childry was the first company to ever export Fuji guides from Japan. And they were very serious about building high performance bass rods. They were one of the first manufacturers to use carbon fiber blanks and boron blanks and sort of go away from graphite. And they were looking for a way to differentiate the rods with the highest performance guides. And they literally found these Fuji guides from Japan, and they were the first people to ever bring them into the U.S. For purposes of putting on bass rods. And Lou Childry happened to be in Alabama, and that kind of turned into the birth of Anglers Resource and the company that I operate now in Foley. That's the North American distributor for these things. So it's really interesting. I would characterize Fuji as being a very moral, very kind of ethically disciplined company that cares a ton about the environment, who really, really loves to fish, right? And so they've taken all their smarts and these unbelievable engineers and everything else, and literally I can't take any credit for any of this history that I'm telling you about. I was a bystander for that of it, which I was alive to see, and I've been the beneficiary of it as a rod builder and now as an owner of Anglers Resource. So I had nothing to do with these advancements or these developments, but that lets me say without any hesitation, there's literally Fuji and there's everything else. Like every single material innovation and revolutionary change in how we think about guides and how we think about reel seats and how we think about the metals or alloys used for guide frames, like the first titanium frame guides, the first, the SIC rings or silicon carbide, which are now considered, are still a unbelievably good guide material, but were sort of revolutionary when they came out. That was Fuji. The first titanium frames were Fuji. It's really interesting because there's not a lot of other industries that I could think of where there's clearly one person that's the front runner, right? Like you could have, Ferrari versus Lamborghini, you could have Ford versus Chevy. I mean, you could pick rifles, shotguns, center console boats, fishing line, right? Like there's always more than one player, and there's been innovation and development everywhere. Fuji is so unique. I can't find an industry that's a close analog where literally one source has brought us almost everything we think of as a modern fishing rod component. If it's not wire guides for fly rods, if it's not roller guides for offshore stand-up rods, and if it's not like butts, bent butts, straight butts, like we think of from Aftco and Winthrop and people like that, literally Fuji invented it, and everybody's been riffing on it since, the 40s. And it's pretty remarkable. It's an unbelievable culture of quality and innovation that they have.
Absolutely. And, when you're going to buy a rod, when you're going to buy all these different brands, virtually all the high-end brands all have Fuji in them. When I go talk to the guys at the shop, I'm like, hey, what has the top quality components? And every single rod that they bring me has Fuji guides on it, which is pretty incredible that you guys have, such a monopoly almost on the industry in a way. It's phenomenal that you guys have such top quality, top tier product, and everybody tries to emulate and copy you guys, right?
Right.
I'm sure you guys have
There's no shortage of competition. I mean, we have a lot of competition, but nobody can catch Fuji, much less surpass them in any measurable way, and every once in a while we sort of get out the testing equipment and we'll do some brake tests and some friction tests and some weight tests and some, crack resistance and some side load tests and everything. And it's shocking. It's a luxury to be able to have the heavyweight champ, no matter what, you know what I mean? Like we're the undisputed king, and we can prove it with science and with data. And
Absolutely.
it really is remarkable because to be on top for that long, just the focus and the kind of never resting on your laurels. And part of it is kind of this, what they refer to as the Japanese mindset, this very deeply ingrained cultural focus on perfecting things and making them as good as they can be and innovating. But it's also interesting too, to me, because Fuji is literally one of the most ethical companies I've ever had the privilege of working with. I mean, it's a pretty simple perspective from where they sit. They love to fish. Their whole industry is built on fishing. we better protect the ocean and we better protect clean water, right? Or else we don't have anywhere to fish. And that's a
Of
problem
course.
for us, and that's a problem for our customers. And they've done some pretty remarkable things in honor of that. Most recently, about 4 years ago, they discontinued black frame guides, which was 68% of our business in North America when they discontinued it. And they did it because the toxic kind of caustic byproducts of the paint they were using to coat the guides, the impact it was having on workers, and the fact that they didn't feel like they could responsibly deal with the byproduct. And so they got rid of it. And it's like, you talk about putting your money where your mouth is, to have a company discontinue their own very best selling products because it wasn't good for the environment. And they said, we'll figure out another way. We'll find a better finish that's good for workers and good for the environment. That's you don't see that very often these days.
Absolutely. And it's pretty hard to innovate like that. So
It
from
is.
my
It
understanding,
is.
Fuji is always a step ahead of the competition, always innovating,
Yep.
always doing the next
Yep.
best thing. Then they're always coming to the States first with their stuff. From what my
Yep.
understanding, you guys are really the forefront leader in the slow pitch jigging world, kind of, and bringing that stuff over right now, right? And that's really
Right.
catching
Yeah.
on here on
And
the East
again,
Coast and on the West Coast and all
yep.
over.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I'm so glad we're talking about slow pitch jigging. This is one of my personal passion projects, one of my favorite things in the world. So if you know anything about the technique, right, it was developed by this guy, Sensei Norihiro Sato, in Japan. And so when he was doing his work, if you think Fuji's prominent in the North American marketplace, they own Japan, right? I mean, it's and it's all high end. It's all titanium SiC and titanium torzite. And going to a tackle shop and looking around over there is just like, wow. As a custom rod builder, we don't see many factory rods put together like their factory rods, and we also don't have the same price points, right? But
Right.
so he did work with Fuji and with other rod manufacturers and said, hey, this is a very different technique, a very different application. We need a very different kind of guide train to set this up. And actually, that technique, among others, kind of, braided line was a big deal, right? When braid came along, it changed everything. We've got very strong line, but it's very abrasive. It requires totally different knots. It requires totally different reels and drags. Like we were torquing out and melting down our Penn Senators and stuff when just because you can put 150 pounds of drag on it and crank the drag down with a 150-pound braid on it and crank the drag down with a strap wrench, right? Doesn't mean the reel can hold up. And we were bending
Right.
frames and buckling crossbars, and of course level lines wouldn't survive and all these things. And so that was kind of coming at the same time that the slow pitch was emerging, and this concept of micro tackle and small tackle optimized for a specific technique. And so, yeah, the popularity and emergence of slow pitch jigging in North America is a really good thing for us, because nobody has put the time in on very small, very strong, corrosion proof, single foot guides, which is what you need, with that slower parabolic action of the slow pitch rod to maximize your capability and to have a rod that'll perform not just 300-400 feet, but at depth. I was spent about 8 hours last Thursday over 1,200 feet slow pitch jigging, and it's like once you get over 600 or 800 feet deep, it's a different world, right? And so
Oh, yeah.
everything matters. Weight matters, diameter of your line matters, length of your leader and size of your leader matters, single or double assist hooks and how easily the jig fouls matters. I mean, just everything matters. And so that's been really fun for me as an angler. I'm a big enthusiast of slow pitch jigging and popping and stick baiting. You let me do anything, that's probably what I want to do, right? You let me do it
Yep.
anywhere, and I want to go to Venice, Louisiana, or go out of Key West or something. And so it's kind of like a kid in a candy store to get to have access to all the new stuff from Japan that Fuji's developing, because those techniques did really originate there and come from there, and they're a few years ahead of us, right? It's also really interesting what I found since I've been in the business in just this first year. Australia is ahead of us too, and I always kind of think
Really?
of things leaving Japan and coming to the West Coast and hitting like the San Diego long range fleet or the professional bass anglers, in the PNW somewhere. But interestingly enough, and I've learned this from the Fuji distributors for Australia and New Zealand, are couple of really cool guys named Paul Starkey and Michael Starkey, and it's a father and a son. And they were kind of walking me through some of the history of it and sharing with me some of their products when I saw them in Japan last year. And it's like, holy cow, these guys are ahead of us. So now I'm sort of dialed in and watching what Japan's doing and trying to make sure I'm not missing anything new there. And I've got the other eye on Australia, New Zealand, because those guys are quietly ahead of us as well. So it's fascinating to see the tackle sort of branch out. And slow pitch was interesting because to me, in my experience, it hit Florida and it's taken a deeper hold in Florida than it has in California. And now it's
Yeah.
starting to kind of get over there. And I don't know if that's driven by the bluefin tuna versus, the plentiful ground fish, bottom fish, demersals, grouper, snapper, all that kind of stuff in Florida or what. But it's almost like slow pitch kind of skipped the West Coast and hit the East Coast and is now working its way backwards. So we'll see what the next trend is. Your guess is as good as mine.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we just talked to a gentleman by the name of Johnny Jiggs. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. He does a lot of slow pitch jigging.
Oh,
And he
Johnny
told
Jigs. Yeah,
me,
Johnny Statham and Will Crane and Chris Doyle, good friends of
yeah,
mine. Yeah, I've
yeah,
fished with them.
good
Great
guys.
guys.
He was telling me
Great guys. Yeah.
they just went out to San Diego and did a bluefin trip out there, and they pretty much kept up with those guys that have never seen a slow pitch rod in their lives.
Right.
All the seasoned
Right.
guys, and the slow pitch kept up with everybody. So it's pretty incredible to see the advancement. But my question to you is,
Unbelievable.
why do you think we're behind compared to Japan? Well, obviously Japan because they innovate there, but
Yeah.
why not? Why Australia?
I don't know. I think Japan, I agree, makes sense because there's so much innovation in the tackle industry and hooks and in lure finishing and just kind of like wacky and different lures that these cats are always chasing. And I attribute a lot of that, frankly, Mark, to being that country, inshore, offshore, freshwater, gets just a tremendous amount of fishing pressure. It is literally, I mean, many times more populous than even big cities in the U.S., all of the Japanese islands, right? And
Right.
so I think the innovation comes from Japan, I think, in part because people are constantly having to innovate to figure out a way to deal with these highly pressured fish, of which there aren't that many, and they may have all been caught several times before. The Australia thing is interesting because it kind of flies in the face of that. Like it's not a real populous nation.
Yeah.
A lot of the country lives on the coastline, but a lot of the country doesn't have access to boats or get offshore and fish. But again, I think what's going on there is the Great Barrier Reef and some of the specific types of fishing they've been doing, like popping and stick baiting for
Yeah.
dogtooth tuna and for GTs. That's a big one.
Right.
Like the way those guys describe it, like, hey, we figured out these techniques to fish for these fish because we got wrecked doing everything else, right? Like they literally broke every other piece of equipment, every lure, every whatever. And so I think in that one, it's a little bit more of a, not the pressured situation, but such big, tough fish, that, and you're kind of remote where you can't just drive to a bunch of tackle shops, like if you were in Miami or if you were in San Diego or something.
Yeah.
And so like most of these cats, as I understand it, have to mail order their gear and it takes a while to get there, and, import and export and all this stuff is difficult. And so you really need your gear to hang up, to hold up, right? Like you
Of
can't be
course.
breaking off a brand new plug. You can't be wrecking a plug. You can't be having the hooks pull out or the back half come off of a trolling plug because it's not just, you can't just get another one, right? So
Yeah.
it seems maybe like that's been kind of a crucible as far as a proving ground and a destruction testing thing. I don't know. I mean, I don't have the answer. It's curious, and was a surprise to me. That's my best stab at it based on what I understand right now.
Sure. Sure. Well, that's pretty awesome though that they're doing that all over there. Is there anything cool that they're seeing right now? Can you give us a little insight into what the foreign markets are looking like? Are we seeing anything over there that is going to come over here that we should be looking forward to?
Oh wow, yeah. So certainly the rising interest in popping and stick baiting and in slow pitch jigging and some of the just real focus on saltwater artificials we're going to continue to see.
Sure.
The bass scene is really growing in Japan. It's always been robust, but the more they send professional anglers over here who do well on the MLF tour, on the Elite Series, on our very best tours, which are ultimately the best bass tours in the world, whether that means anything to you as an angler or not.
Yeah.
I think we're going to continue to see that kind of innovation, and they push us, right? The other thing is COVID kind of wrecked people. I mean, globally, the supply chain was really disrupted. A lot of manufacturing had moved to China. And then all of a sudden, there's a lot of Chinese work stoppages due to COVID. There's a lot of supply chain issues, both manufacturing and the upstream raw components, raw materials required to manufacture pieces and parts to make certain products and all this. and we saw the slowdown. We've seen some degradation in quality coming from there. And so and then container shipping went through the roof, right? Like I don't have the numbers, but container shipping's gone up like 280% and only came down to like 170% increase or something. I mean, it depends on whose numbers you look at and what snapshot and all that. But essentially what that's done is it's slowed down the knockoff copying kind of industry,
Well,
right?
that's good.
And it seems like it's created some breathing room and some space and even some competitive advantage for people that are actually innovating and actually doing it with their own two hands and kind of leading the way. And so some people have really had a hard time with COVID, but it seems like it's kind of the Me Too fast followers that are just trying to have an almost as good product at a really competitive price that's manufactured, cheaply, wherever that is. It seems like we're seeing these kind of smaller, what we might think of as like boutique or specialty kind of manufacturers kind of take hold and dig in. And as the cost of this other stuff that used to be cheap gets so much more expensive, this original vintage kind of not, a JDM market or Australian market stuff isn't so expensive anymore, right? And so I think that's caused some people to try different things. And we all have those lures we use, whether we troll them or whether they're stick baits or poppers or whether they're jigs, and they work. You can't explain why they work or how they work. Sometimes they look a lot like a lot of other lures, or maybe a lot of other lures look like them, but for some reason that lure just always delivers. I think some of those lures, if we can just get them in people's hands, they're believers and they're willing to pay for them, and that'll bring more of that kind of innovation. And it seems like that's kind of where we are right now. Globally, what I hear, Fuji is very well connected with global rod component manufacturing, a lot of which happens in China. And it seems like we're currently at a little bit of a out of phase with them. China is down and has slowed down quite a bit, and North America is really kind of booming. And some of the other sectors, Europe, Australia, some of the others are doing really well. So it's a little bit of a sea change, and I think it just has to do with those supply chain disruptions, work stoppages, the cost of containers, shipping, and all that kind of stuff. And maybe a little bit of people learning that part of the way they do business in China is if you set up a manufacturing concern there, they're going to copy whatever it is you're doing, right? And you kind of have to sign off to them your intellectual property, and it becomes theirs, and they don't have the same, you can't just start making cola and putting it in a can that says Coca-Cola and putting it on the shelves here, right? But that's kind of an accepted practice there. And I think you're also seeing some manufacturers start to kind of get wise to that and want to keep things domestic and under their own control, and to have the ability to quickly pivot and change and restock that you only get when you manufacture locally and not, dependent on this global supply chain and global ocean freight shipping.
Right. Well, I was going to kind of ask you a little bit leading into that, I want to understand what North America's role is in the innovative process. So can you give us some insight in, how a rod component pops into someone's head on the design team, goes through all the different tests, and then goes into production? Do we, as North America, do we have a say in that? Do we have any role in that, in testing product and making, playing with it and stuff?
Absolutely. It's a great question. And, again, bear in mind that my direct sort of red in top secret clearance affiliation is, a year old, right?
Yeah.
But I would say that historically, not very much. More recently, yes. And so specifically, what Fuji has always tried to do, and I'll just talk about Fuji specifically because that's what I know, right?
Sure.
They bring a very engineering mindset towards what is a current problem, right? Guides are rusting. Okay, well, how do we keep guides from rusting? Well, titanium doesn't rust. Well, you can't use raw titanium because that's too brittle, or it's too soft, or it's too, right? And so it's usually trying to solve a problem that's going to give the angler a better set of tools that drives what they do, right? And they've been very, very successful with that. But there's also, like I alluded to earlier, as we think about kind of custom rod builders as a global market, I think they're starting to see that emerge, and that being almost like an entirely different market than what we would refer to as the OEM or original equipment manufacturing market. So to make the distinction, I'll just talk about my customers. There are customers who buy my products from me, the Fuji products from me, and they use them to manufacture their own products. St. Croix, G. Loomis, North Fork Composites, Edge Rods, Cashin Rods. I mean, I could go on and on. There's a lot of companies that, and so they're using our parts to manufacture their rods.
Wow.
But then there's also this other class of customers that are custom builders like me, or little small shop, mom and pop kind of tackle stores that do repair, whatever. They're buying the parts to build their own, to assemble their own rods, or to resell those parts to people that do, right?
Right.
And so historically, that market, the custom market, has been so small that it didn't really, as a percentage of the compared to the OEMs, that it didn't really warrant much attention, frankly, right? But now, between the combination of significant OEMs, like when you talk about a St. Croix rod, or you talk about a G. Loomis, who's in Woodland, Washington, right? Like, they are major global manufacturing concerns that
Huge
export
players.
everywhere. Yeah, right, exactly. And they don't use exclusively Fuji. We are very proud to be on a lot of their rod series. We were on rods that both of those companies had that just won, as we sit here, August of 2023. Both of those companies won best of class or best of show in ICAST with rods featuring Fuji components, right?
That's
We're
incredible.
delighted about that. But they use sort of, yeah, thank you. Again, I can't take any credit. All credit goes to G. Loomis and St. Croix, but they're making more rods than most of the Japanese companies that manufacture rods and everything else. So just by virtue of being a large market, we've sort of bridged the gap between us and Fuji and we use a trading partner named Koa. That's kind of the way Fuji helps manage global import and export, and tariffs and taxes and duties and freight and all this kind of stuff, so they can really focus on innovation and manufacturing. We're starting to have a louder voice, right? Both by virtue of these significant manufacturers who are innovating themselves and who are ahead of the game, right? And then you've also got this emerging custom rod building market that frankly has a different set of appetites and has a different tolerance for price point. Like, an example I'll give you is Fuji manufactures titanium framed ruby ringed guides. And I'm talking about rubies like the precious gemstone rubies, right?
Really?
These guides are like $4,000 to $6,000 a set.
What's the purpose?
There's a surprising amount of demand for those guides on like really high-end presentation rods for custom builders who are giving a gift rod to somebody, or somebody retires from running a company, or somebody has won a bunch of tournaments and is retiring and selling their 82 Viking, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So it's kind of between those two things, the significant OEMs and the emerging kind of high-end custom builders. We have a lot of sway. North America does. The other thing that I think a lot of people don't really realize is the notion of a carbon fiber fishing rod, or a rod blank made of carbon fiber, is a distinctly American notion. That's all us, right? And so we tend to kind of lump that in with a lot of the innovations that come out of Japan, with whether it's, using American fibers to braid lines that are actually kind of like, well, I guess it's a Japanese invention, even though they're using Honeywell fibers, right? Braided lines, fluorocarbon, a lot of these things that we think of coming from there. Graphite is people like Don Green and Gary Loomis, and it is state of Washington, good old US of A in the beginning, with Fenwick and Lamiglass and G. Loomis and LCI, Loomis Composite Industries. So I also think we have the good fortune of having some sway there, because they're smart enough to kind of have an eye on what's happening. And I think they understand that the next big evolution in blank manufacturing, whether it's materials, whether it's assembly techniques and manufacturing processes, is probably at least as likely or more likely to come from the US than it is to come from Japan or elsewhere, just based on the history that it was born here, right? And then we also currently benefit from a very robust, I guess you could kind of say, aerospace and defense kind of manufacturing and design structure within the US. We're one of the more militarized nations in the world, and we're at the bleeding edge of innovation with all that stuff. And right, wrong, or indifferent, all that stuff bleeds down, like, or kind of ripples out, right? Like, I'm going to get it wrong, but I'm pretty sure the first like full carbon fiber rod series Gary Loomis designed and built, that was kind of one of the founding of G. Loomis as a rod company, was like leftover material or scrim from making helicopter rotor blades or something. And
Oh
he
my
was like, I
goodness.
can use that. It's IM6. It's the right module. I mean, we should go to him and let him set the record straight. But we continue to see some of that stuff. I mean, there's so much innovation going on with ceramics and with titanium out and all these various alloys, carbon fibers, because of aerospace, right? Because of trying to have a light payload that has a high temperature tolerance and all this. It takes a while to kind of ripple effect into the fishing tackle industry, but we have more of that than just about anywhere else in the world, and that stuff plays a role too, right?
Yep. Absolutely. Well, clearly you know a whole hell of a lot about rod building and all the components and everything, and even the history. You know all about this stuff from G Loomis and all this, and all the way back from Fuji back in the 30s. So you have yourself a podcast as well, right? It's about rod building,
Yeah,
no?
yeah. Just started, launched this year. It's called Mastering Rod Building. We get together and talk about the science and art and history of rod building, and kind of cover all topics from who's who in the manufacturing world, and showcase some of these American or North American gems like a St. Croix, a Cash, and a G Loomis. We also talk about a lot of education, how to build rods. It's really pretty simple, and somebody can, for the very first time they build a rod, can build a better rod than they can buy, or as good a rod as they can buy if they're willing to put the time and attention into it. And so we try to kind of demystify that for people and help them understand how fun and easy it is. We spend a lot of time focusing on new products and what's innovative and new in the custom rod building space. A lot of times what we see in this country is things, some clever rod builder somewhere will develop a new technique or a new construction method or a new design, and then it will bleed over, right? So like I'll give you one example because this is interesting. There's a guy in Oroville, California, who's a retired, I think he's a naval fighter jet. He's either Air Force or Navy. I think he was a naval aviator, flew fighter jets. He's a hardcore engineer by training and education, named Rich Forehand. Rich sat down at one point. He's a big time bass fisherman, loves to fish on the California Delta. And he sits down at one point and he looks at a fishing rod like you'd look at a fighter jet. Like, what is it? It needs what it needs on there and nothing else. Like, what can we strip off of this rod, right? And the fundamental premise being, every time we add weight to a rod, we rob it of efficiency and performance. But we can't fish with it without a reel seat, without a handle, without guides and a tip top. So we have to put this stuff on there. But how do we do it in a thoughtful way that minimizes the weight and therefore minimizes the amount of performance we rob from it, right? And the guy literally sat down and went through every aspect of a rod and changed things, right? And he ultimately is the reason behind micro guides. He's the one who invented the split grip, because he's like, you never touch the center part of the grip on a rod. You only put your hands on the very butt and right behind the reel seat.
Yeah.
He's the one who invented no foregrip rods, right? He didn't invent, but he heavily innovated and optimized the way to spiral wrap or acid wrap guides, right? So that's,
Wow.
you walk through a tackle store now, whether it's a Bass Pro Shops or your local, for me, it's Mark's Outdoor Sports here in Birmingham, which is just a killer shop. And every rod in there, I see Rich's influence, right? And so the industry has kind of learned, like, hey, we should have one ear to the ground and watch what these custom cats are doing, because a lot of it's cosmetic and it's not really performance related, or it's not feasible for manufacturing at scale. But hey, if we can get away with dropping a bunch of cork, which is expensive, in the middle of a grip, or EVA, and make a lighter rod that costs less and people pay more for, like, hey, this is a good thing, right? So it's kind of interesting to look at the influence of just one person like Rich Forehand, right? So we spend a lot of time on the podcast trying to tell the story of that history, and a lot of people don't know it, and explain, not because it matters who's first, like, nobody knows everything, everybody knows something. Like, this is a wonderful community of it's like any other hobby. You get a bunch of people together that really like to do the same thing, they're probably going to get along, they're probably going to have other shared interests and all that. But I do think there's some interesting stories and some interesting history there that are worth telling, and we spend time doing that on the podcast, featuring those kind of, educating on those kind of builders and innovators, and see what they're up to and what's next, right? So it's been fascinating. I thought I knew. I've been a student of the game for 28 years, and I thought I knew a lot about rod building, and I've run the podcast for like less than 6 weeks, and I can't tell you how much I've learned. It's been humbling, but it's fun.
I'm sure it is. Yeah, it's been a ride for us over here at the Science of Fishing, and we've been doing a lot over here, and I've been learning a lot just interviewing different people and different parts of the industry, whether it's, rod component manufacturers like you or boat manufacturers or
Yep.
captains themselves. There's a lot for everybody
Yep.
to learn. And that's the whole
Right.
point, I feel like, of what we're doing. But you've been
Absolutely.
a rod builder for a long time, right? So
Hmm.
how did that play into you taking over Fuji, and then into your personal life? Do you have more time to fish now? What have you been up to? You said it actually in the beginning that you've had more time.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so if my wife was sitting next to me, I'd be downplaying that. It's work. It's R&D. It's product testing and development. Like obviously it's essential to putting, food on the table. It's not just me out fishing, but
Right.
yeah, so it's interesting. Fuji, being a rod builder for so long, I've gotten to experience Fuji as a customer for a long time, and then now to sort of be in charge of that for North America, it's all my fault, right? So some of the things with long lead times, some of the things with getting certain sizes of guides or finishes of frames, or there would be things like they would release all the new guides, but not the new matching tip tops, and we'd have to wait a year to get those, right? Or if they'd release all the guides except one size, and it's like, well, hey, I need one of those on every rod, like I can't get anywhere. I'd like to think that my experience as a rod builder has helped me kind of understand how the market in North America is experiencing Fuji and help them, strategize and plan and everything. They're the best there is at engineering and quality control and tight manufacturing and everything else and innovation. But I love to get to collaborate with them and be able to kind of have a voice on behalf of North American rod builders. And in terms of it leading me into Angler's Resource, I mean, I know everybody in the industry. I've been a customer of everybody in the industry. Everybody has some good products, but it's just so fascinating. This is the story of how I got involved in the company, and this will make you laugh.
Yeah.
We mentioned before the slow pitch jigging, and I'm a big slow pitch jigger. And I was aware of a number of products, specifically different reel seats and different sizes and styles of titanium frame single foot guides that were the guides that we needed to build the right slow pitch rods here. And I knew that's what the Japanese manufacturers were using to build their slow pitch rods. So Fuji asked me to go to Foley, and me and Billy Vavona, who's a well-known rod builder who's written a book about decorative thread wraps. Gosh, I'm trying to think. A whole bunch of people that are rod building people that have been around in the community for a while. They had us come down and do a workshop where we were teaching advanced rod building techniques. And so I said, okay, here's what we're going to do. I've got a buddy keeps a boat down in Orange Beach. I'm going to go teach this class on Friday and Saturday. Then on Sunday, I'm going to take them fishing, and I'm going to take them slow pitch jigging because they don't even know what it is. They've never seen it. They think the jigs are expensive. Where do you get hooks? I don't even have split ring pliers. They're not going to do this on their own. And what I was thinking, Mark, was that if I took them out fishing, they'd see how much fun it was. They'd see how effective it was on the highly endangered American red snapper in the northern Gulf of Mexico. And then when I said, hey, let's get some of these products in, I thought they'd be willing to do it, right? And so it was kind of like a little bit of a sneaky end around by me to try to find a way by hook or by crook to get them to bring some of these products in from Japan that they didn't think they could sell. It's like, you can sell them. This new slow pitch thing is going to be a big deal.
Yeah.
And we didn't have the best day of fishing. We started off good, and it was kind of a slow afternoon, and the current was a little off, and a lot of pressure and all this. But so we're kind of casually having a beer on the boat and just chatting. And the gentleman who owned Angler's Resource for 28 years before, going back to Lou Children Sons before I took over, was a guy named Carl Haver. And I asked the then director of marketing, Jim Ising, like, hey, Jim, what's Carl's exit strategy? Would he ever sell the company? And he was like, oh, no, he'd never sell the company. Kind of walk me through all these reasons and all this conversation. And then later in the day, when we were getting ready to all kind of done cleaning fish and get ready to go home, he said, hey, were you serious when you're asking about what Carl's going to do with the company? I said, yeah, he said, why do you want to know? I said, well, I might be interested in buying it. He's like, you'd buy it? Like, rod builders don't have any money. And it's like, well, Jim, I'm not a rod builder. Like, I've got a career in healthcare and consulting and, I've helped start a couple companies and take them IPO or sell them or
Oh,
whatever.
wow.
It's like I'm a business person. Maybe we could make this work. And that was on a Sunday, and literally not the next Thursday, but the Thursday after that, Carl and I basically handshook the deal, and it was done. And all we had to do was get through all the diligence and make sure we checked all the boxes and everything kind of lined up and checked out, and it was over. So it was kind of funny. I guess I owe the position with the company to slow pitch jigging and trying to get more Fuji products into the U.S.
There you go. That's some divine intervention there. That's crazy, man.
Well, it is. I mean, and that's what I said. There were a lot of moving parts, and it was beyond my understanding, and it was meant to be, and I'm really grateful for it. So, but it is interesting too, because I think as a rod builder, I get so dialed into all this stuff, and I'm so familiar with the Fuji catalog and every size and style of guide, and what the ring is, and what the frame is, and what the finish is, and what you use it for, and all this. And I think a lot of times as anglers, we just get overwhelmed with that a little bit. It's like, you know what? I just want it to work. Like, just give me a rod, right?
Yeah.
But when you start to get into the design of the guides and frames, Fuji was the first one to ever introduce tangle-free guides with the advent of braided lines, and that's still copyrighted and trademarked globally, and nobody can kind of take these innovations that they've had and have a true tangle-free guide. The ceramics, I mean, there's so much subtlety to it, which is why I love, kind of your podcast and getting into the science and physics and everything of it. If you took two guide rings and they're exact same material, and one was very thick and created a lot of surface area or line contact versus one was kind of thinner or more V-shaped, you could minimize the friction. But by doing that, you'd also minimize heat dissipation, right? And so it's like, what's the evil that goes on there? The amount of times guides get bent, how much resistance to bending do you want them to have versus ability to spring back? How many times do you want to be able to straighten those guides before, like a paper clip that when you bend it back and forth a few times, it breaks, right? Like I think most anglers would be very, very surprised how much hardcore engineering and design and physics go into the best rod components in the world. And like one of the greatest fallacies is a guide is a guide is a guide. They're all the same. A reel seat's a reel seat's a reel seat. They're all the same. They're not, right? And so, that's the fun part of the podcast, and the fun part of getting to come on to something like this is to kind of talk to people about, hey, go deeper, scratch the surface a little bit, and understand the composition of the ceramic materials, understand the degree to which it's polished, understand the geometry of the ring and how it contacts the line, not when it's sitting still or when you're casting, but when it matters, when you're hooked up under load and that fish is burning, right? And how do they hold up to passing knots, and which direction is the ring pressed into the frame, and what's the material of the frame, and how is it finished, right? Like all these things, you can nerd out as much as you want, I guess. And for anybody who's interested in it, please, check out the Mastering Rod Building podcast, check out the Mastering Rod Building website. There's a wonderful not-for-profit kind of rod building board called rodbuilding.org, www.rodbuilding.org. And then there's a lot of the component resellers, those customers I was talking about who take our products and sell them on to people that are builders. You literally, I'm 50 and I've been doing this 28 years. And so in the, spring of 1993, when I started, nobody would tell me how to do anything because it was like competitive. They didn't want me to know, right? Now, today, you go onto the internet, you go to YouTube, you go to Instagram, you go to Facebook, you go to Mudhole Custom Tackle is one. Literally everything you need to know about building a rod is right there. And it's like easier to do than ever. So, and look, being able to repair rods is a practical skill, right? Like it's useful. How many times have we been frustrated that we got to drop a rod off at the shop and pay $20 to get a tip top replaced? Man, you could do that at home in less than 5 minutes once you know what you're doing.
Yep.
So it's a relevant skill if you're going to spend a lot of time out on the water. Plus, you can learn to build gaffs, you can learn to build dehookers, you can learn to build bait nets. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff you can do. Makes awesome gifts, all that. So, anything. I try to be kind of a Pied Piper of rod building in the industry and get more people into it. So if you're interested, if you're listening to this and this is interesting to you and you want to learn more, there's a ton to learn out there. You can also keep it real simple if you want to. Just go buy whichever rod and reel you've had good luck with and stick with it. But if you want to learn more, there's a lot out there.
Absolutely. You guys got to buy something with Fuji components on
That's right.
it.
We obviously highly recommend that, but horses for courses. But sometimes the best way is to figure it out on your own, like I did, and try everything else, and just find that your failure rate and how it lasts and how it performs is just not the same. And then you really believe, then right? And you in every fiber of your being, you understand the difference in quality, and that's not a bad thing. That's a customer for life for us typically.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I'm sure most of your rods, if not all of them, are all built by you with highest quality
Mhm.
components around.
Yep.
Can you tell us any cool stories that any cool stuff that you've caught on your rods? Any cool fish?
Oh man, so I'm kind of on this process of knocking stuff off the bucket list, right? While slow pitch jigging, I haven't done as well keeping up with species, but so far this year, I've got a personal best scamp. I have my two of my three personal best scamp. One that was just under 27 pounds, and one that was 22 and a half. Those are both caught on a jig with Captain Eddie Berger in Venice and with Captain Bo Strange in the fishing public out of Dauphin Island. Caught all my tile fish this year: golden tile, blue line tile, gray tile, sand tile. Although we get less excited about that one. Caught a Darwin slimehead, orange ruffy, Alfonsino. Let's see what else we caught out deep. I caught a Kitty Mitchell grouper on the jig, which was
That's
it wasn't
awesome.
big, but it was got a Mystic grouper on the jig, on a Johnny's jig, on the Yankee Caps out of Key West. I still get really, probably the biggest one for me this year is I finally got a wahoo on the jig.
Wow.
It was only about a 35-pound wahoo. It was not big as wahoo go, but man, everything has to go right when you're running like 15 or 20-pound braid to a 40 or 50-pound fluorocarbon leader to a jig to catch a wahoo on the jig. Everything has to go right. You have to hook them just right. The fight has to go just right.
Yeah.
Someone has to not miss the gaff shot, so that was, I mean, that's the kind of moment that I get really, really excited about. It's not that I haven't caught wahoo before, and it's not that we couldn't go catch a pile of them trolling out of Venice or something, but to catch one on the jig is a lot of fun. We were catching some blackfin. We've been targeting snapper and grouper and that kind of stuff. And we had sort of snotty weather, and we were kind of limited where we could go out of Venice with Captain Eddie Berger. And we found a pot of blackfins, a pretty good size school of 25 to 35-pound blackfins, big blackfin tuna that we were able to drop on, and they're in about 150. We were in about 2,200 feet of water, and they were in about 150 to 175 feet of water. And just like every time you drop the jig down, you're hooked up, right? And so we've been doing this thing for a while, kind of sorting through some of the smaller fish, trying to put some hammers in the box, for sashimi and everything. And I dropped the jig, and the jig didn't get as far down as it should have. It stopped all of a sudden and start reeling up. And a lot of times in Venice, there's so many kings, big kings, smoker kings, and so many wahoo and everything. You just get a tick and it's gone. You're slack and you reel up and your jig's gone. So I was like, oh man, I must have got kingfish. I start reeling up. All of a sudden I realize the fish is eating the jig and come up, and now I've gotten to him, and then it's burning me down. It's like, oh, what is this? And of course, the first thing you think in Venice is a yellowfin, because they're around all the time.
Yeah.
And then it starts scoping out, and it's like, wait a second, what is this? Did I finally get my wahoo? And they're like, oh no, it's not a wahoo. You've been cut off, whatever. And then we're trying to speculate if it could have been a cobia, because we'll catch those on the jig in Venice, or a shark or whatever. And um, water was not as clear as it sometimes is out of Venice, and we were kind of being casual with this fish, and we get it right to the side of the boat, and you see the stripes, and everybody's like, wahoo, and freaks out and grabs a gaff. And thankfully we got the shot and we got him in the boat. But that one's I've been chasing that fish for 8 years, and I'm pretty sure I know I've had at least two on. I'm pretty sure I've had as many as five on. Was never able to bring any of them to the boat just because those teeth, man, they just cut through everything. But
Yeah.
I got that one, so I'm pretty excited about that.
That's awesome.
And then besides that, just trying to go deep, like catch big snowies and yellow edge grouper. Got my first barrel fish this year. And I didn't catch either one of these, but I've seen the two biggest eels I've ever seen in my life, including one was a conger eel about 7 feet long, and the other was some kind of like king. Oh, I've forgotten. I want to say king cobra eel, but it wasn't that. It was like king snake eel or something. And this thing was literally like 8 feet long.
Wow.
Remember the JYG Jig Pro staff, Ryan Smith, caught it again on Captain Bo Strange's boat. And man, that thing was like a dinosaur. We're sort of grouper fishing this pile of rocks in deep water, and he gets hooked up right on the bottom, boom, runs him right into the rocks. We're thinking grouper. He has to let it go slack because he's rocked up. Thing comes out. He's fighting it for a while, rocks him up again. We're like, oh man, you're in trouble. I don't know. You're going to get him again. Lets it go slack for a while. About 2 minutes later, fish swims out again. Now he's on it really hard. Like, I'm going to win it or lose it right here. And I mean, fights this thing all the way up. We're videoing the whole thing, thinking it's a big yellow edge or something. We get it up, and this eel, I mean, literally looked like the Loch Ness monster or something. I've never seen anything like it. It was a freaky, and apparently it was delicious. I did not take any of it home and didn't get to try it, but apparently
Y'all
it got
kept it.
the Ikejime treatment and the Shinkajime treatment, and it was apparently really good. So to me, that's fun, like catching new stuff on the jig that you would never think of, right?
Absolutely.
How about
Yeah.
you? You've been traveling around recording podcasts and going all these places and meeting people. You gotten to do anything fun fishing wise?
Yeah, I've been doing a little bit of tournament king fishing with the guys on the How You Reelin' team. So I've been
Oh
moving
yeah?
around with them. They're fighting for the rings. I don't know if you're familiar with it, the Blue Water series down here. So I've been doing a little bit of that. I went wahoo fishing the other night. We didn't get anything,
Nice.
but I'm always trying to fish and I'm always trying to get out there, but probably my favorite spot's Venice. I like fishing
Oh
out of
yeah.
there. It's phenomenal, and it's so rich with life. It's beautiful.
I try to tell people, like, my buddy Colby Beelan, the original honey badger, got me going down there about now, golly, probably 13 or 14 years ago. And he had a group of guys that went, he lives in Arkansas and has a group of guys that goes down there in October when the big yellowfin are behind the shrimp boats, like every year. It's like around the first full moon in October, or the full moon in October every year. And I'd heard about this trip and I'd always wanted to go, but the same six guys were always going. And it was kind of one of those deals. One day I got the call and he's like, hey, do you want to go? I have a cancellation. I was like, I'm in. And I've been in ever since. And it kind of introduced that fishery. And the first time we went down there, we were supposed to fish a couple of days with Captain Eddie Berger and a guy named Captain Hunter Caballero. There's so many good captains and great boats down there, right? And we actually got blown out, and I started inshore. We inshore fished as like a backup plan and fished with Captain Patrick Dickinson of Dixie Outfitters and Dixie Riverside Charters, and like I'm fishing with him to this day. Like I take my kids fishing with him, so it's only about 6 hours door to door from Birmingham for me, so it's close enough that we can do it. But I don't know of another place, Mark, that offers the diversity of species and has the combination of the unbelievable inshore and the unbelievable blue water and offshore, right? And then not only within that, it's diverse, right? Like you want to go chase redfish, do it. You want to go chase flounder, do it. You want to go catch speckled trout, do it. You want to target sheep's head or triple tail, you can, right? You want to target cobia, or you want to go offshore and you want to do wahoo, you want to do tuna, you want to do deep drop swords, you want to do billfish. Like what Eddie will standardly do is we'll go out to a rig that's been holding yellowfin, and we'll just kind of like put out a few rods and troll around the platform or the rig to kind of see what fish are in the area and mark them and kind of see, these captains are like savants. They can tell so much about the fish by where they are in the water column and how they're stacked up, and they know whether like, hey, these fish are in the right mood or they're not. And Eddie, we're trolling around looking at fish, and we caught 2 blue and 1 white marlin.
Wow.
On like pink and purple Russell lures, trolling for wahoo while we were just trying to scout out the tuna. I mean, like, how many places can you do that, right?
Not
It
many,
was
man.
hilarious too, because his mate at the time was a big bill fisherman, and he was like, he tore that boat apart finding the flags, and he finally found the flags and put up the marlin flags to show that we had caught and released these marlin. But yeah, you try to tell people what that fishery is like, and it's just and people, all the fish people don't even pay attention to, the beeliners and the red snapper and the scamp grouper and the cobia and I mean, there's just, you pick a fish, you can go find them there, right? It's just crazy.
Right. No, it's so rich over there, and I love it. I mean, I'm a little biased. I love Miami, but Venice
Yeah.
is probably number 1 on my list. Miami's number 2. Like,
Yeah.
over here, we can run to the Bahamas. We can get out to the to the channel. It's awesome here too. But yeah, Venice it's something else.
Man, the only thing about that east coast of Florida, man, the current will open your eyes, dude. I thought I had fished in current until we started going out of like north of Miami, like out of Pompano Beach, and
Yeah.
that area, and it was like, oh my gosh, like, oh, they're like, current's not bad. I'm like, what are you talking about? This is like 3 or 4 knots. They're like, oh, this is a good day. It's like this all the time. You're like, what?
Yeah,
Oh
I
man.
keep my boat out at Pompano Beach, and I have a
Oh, do
good
you?
story
Yeah.
for you up there. So we were up there one day, me and my girlfriend, we were fishing. My girlfriend lived, and at the time, we just went out for a little evening cruise, and I was like, I want to put some rods out. So got some goggle eyes that I had purchased from the bait guy down the street. Went out
Yeah.
there, put 2 goggle eyes out, and sat there. And it was starting to get a little rough, and I was like, all right, it's dark now. My girlfriend's like, oh, I want to go home. Let's go home. I'm like, just give me 5 minutes. 5 minutes, please. We'd caught nothing for the day, 0 bites. I'm starting to lose hope. And
Yep.
suddenly, I just see my rod just double over in like 130 feet of water. And I'm like, is it a big tuna? Is it a big sail? Because it's not like
Right.
the typical mahi that comes by or something. So I'm fighting this fish for like 15 minutes, and I'm sitting there, and I'm like, this thing's dead weight now. So I'm pulling it up. I'm like, I must have gotten sharked. Pull it up. I horse this thing in. It's a 60-pound kingfish. And then
Oh,
coming with it is like a 7-foot bull shark that's just
no.
now circling it as it's
Yeah.
coming. And I'm like, get the
Yeah.
gaff, get the gaff. She goes to try to gaff the fish. She's like, I can't gaff it. So I give her the rod. I go and gaff it. And usually down here, when you gaff a fish, it's like, all right, we'll just swing it right into the boat. When I
Right.
gaffed that fish, it just stopped. And I was like, all right, got to choke down. So I choked down on that, and I just got that thing in. But I'm going to get
Yeah.
that fish mounted. That was probably one of the coolest that I've been doing. One of the coolest fish that I've caught recently.
Dude, that's a smoker, man. 60
Yeah.
pounds is a hammer.
We
Those
don't get it.
things.
You guys get those all the time in Louisiana, though, right?
Yeah, and we got big ones off the beach in Alabama too. Like that's one
Really?
thing we've got. We've got big kings and just about year round, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, they're man, that's a fun fish. The problem with Louisiana is every time you hook a king, you're hoping it's a wahoo, right? And then you're a little like you're not unhappy to be hooked up, but you're a little disappointed when it's a big king, not a wahoo. In Alabama, we have to run so far to get to the wahoo. Like I never have that problem. I fully expect it's a king, and I'm happy it's a king when I get it to the gaff, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, that's funny. Yeah, that Hillsborough Inlet is no joke, man. Anytime you've got a YouTube channel of people wrecking boats near your inlet where you've got to go out to go fish, proceed with caution, man. It was an eye opener for me. That was not a
Absolutely.
joke,
Yeah, the inlets in South Florida are dangerous. You have to be careful.
man.
And there's a lot of
that's
crazy boaters out there.
I was gonna say the closer you get to Miami, the more interesting things you see both at the boat ramp and on the water. In my
Yeah.
limited experience, I'm not gonna pretend to know it all, but I've seen some crazy stuff, man. I'm sure you being there full time, I can only imagine.
Yeah, we've seen some crazy stuff going out of here and down in Hallover Inlet and stuff like that. Just it's all over. You know, the qualified captain with those guys. It's all on there. People getting hurt, and people got to be careful.
Yeah, you do absolutely
Yeah.
have to be careful. Well, hey, if you're up in Pompano, you're right by Johnny Jigs and those guys.
Yeah.
And Jig Pro, JYG Pro, they're right up in West Palm Beach Gardens, which I
Yep.
think is just a little bit maybe even north of there. There's
Yeah.
a bunch of ace hardcore jiggers live in that area. It's kind of the epicenter of the OGs in the US, man.
Yeah. Well, anytime you're down here, let's get out there. Let's do some slow
Definitely.
pitching.
And I was going to say, consider this a standing invitation for you or anyone Science of Fishing or Center Consoles only. You are invited to come fish with me out of Orange Beach, Alabama.
Thank you.
We're down there doing it all the time. It's no Venice and it's no Miami, but it can be good. And consider it a standing invitation.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Hey, as long as I got a rod in my hand, I'm happy. Fish or no fish.
All right. We'll keep you real happy then. We'll keep you happy.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate you coming on the podcast, Bill. You guys got to go check out his podcast. Make sure you buy Fuji components, y'all. And thanks for watching today. Thanks, Bill.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. Big fan of the podcast, and keep doing what you're doing. I love the education you guys are bringing to the fishing industry. Thanks very much.
Absolutely. I appreciate that. Thank you, Bill.
Thanks for joining us on CCO's The Science of Fishing. We hope that this episode was helpful and you learned something for the next time you're wetting a line. Before we cast off, a special thanks to our sponsors, Gulfstream Lures, Tackle Crafters, and Black Reef Spearfishing. Your support helps us deliver insightful content to our listeners. Don't forget, we're available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and all the major platforms. So wherever you listen to your favorite shows, we're there. Stay hooked by following us on social media @Science of Fishing and hitting the subscribe button. And if you know someone who'd enjoy this, don't hesitate to share. Until we meet again, catch 'em up.